Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm so excited to be talking about the wonderful film Widow Clicquot. I'm joined today by director Thomas Napper, actor and producer Haley Bennett, and producer Christina Weiss Lurie. And Thomas, starting with you, I loved hearing you describe that the moment that you kind of really connected with the script and the story was the scene where it is Barb Nicole and her husband, and they're under the covers together, and they're kind of talking about their marriage and the idea of this being a marriage that's really equal and much more about a partnership, which at the time was obviously incredibly modern and forward for them. And I was interested in how connecting to a scene like that really gave you the inroad of how you wanted to tell the story as a director.
Oh, yes. Hi, Mara. That was, yeah, the first reading of the script of Erin's beautiful script. That was the scene where that really got its claws into me because it felt, first of all, very modern. It felt like a different way to approach a period drama. It had this at the center of this story set in 1799 and 1806 was this very modern relationship between two young people trying to work their way in the world and to create taste, a flavor to this new product, which was, exploding, which was champagne. And so I loved the idea that Francois, the scene is set on their wedding night. So they've just been married. It's an arranged marriage between the Ponsardin family and the Clicquot family. They hardly know each other. And then they're in this bed together. And he asks her if they can share a kind of equality. And I think at the heart of their relationship and at the heart of the kind of newlyweds relationship is this kind of idea of exploring each other and finding out who they are, but also there's a kind of innocence to it. There's a sort of beautiful innocence to that conversation. And really, it's the only one of its kind in the film. The film goes forward from there, showing their relationship as their life together as it changes. And when I was talking before with Haley, it just felt very modern in that they were bohemian, if you like, that they are different. They're not conventional orthodox people, or he certainly is extremely eccentric, and he's showing himself to Barb Nicole, who in some moments is quite bashful about, how she receives him being so extrovert and unusual. But they create a world for themselves in this vineyard, and from that world, that kind of creative world they have together, comes this the beginnings of what we know now as Veuve Clicquot champagne. So it was their journey initially together that kind of created the spark, if you like, and then obviously in the film, Barbara Nicole takes it on herself on her own without him, and that's really where the story kicks on.
It's such a great description. And Haley, and coming over to you, I know that you were given the book initially that it's based on when you were working on Cyrano. And so this is a project that you were with for quite a while. And I've heard you describe previously how one of the elements of developing a character is the beauty of that time being how you can use that time to overcome any of the obstacles or challenges in figuring out who they are and how you want to inhabit them. And so with playing this character where there's so many complexities, I was curious about what were some of the challenges in terms of finding your way into her during that time.
Because I kind of, Christina and I partnered in developing this story. We inhabited the space for quite some time, which is always a luxury, I think, as an actor to be able to sit and marinate in a character for so long, especially when you're dealing with lots of other aspects of, I guess, your vision as a film as a whole. and dealing with kind of many script iterations and plot points and character points, and obviously Tilar Mazio's book was our source material. But you know, we had a lot of different we had script meetings at our house in the countryside of England.
But jumping in a little bit. The first time that Haley called me, I think she was on a vineyard in Italy, and she was like, I have to play this part. And then flash forward, you know, months later, and I'm visiting Joe and Haley in their home in England, and she's, you know, working in the garden, and she's working in the fields, and she embodied
the land.
Barbe Nicole in her
Daily practice.
Haley
Yeah.
English way. And so I think that was absolutely, for me as a producer and living with this project for so many years, I thought, here's our perfect young Barbe Nicole.
I really love that. And, you know, in the path of getting this film created, obviously you're telling a very luxurious story within a time period, but at the same time in the space of independent filmmaking. And so it sounds like one of the decisions within that was to have it be set solely in the vineyard. We don't actually see her leave the vineyard until there's a scene in a court right at the end of the movie. And so for all of you, I wanted to ask about the way in which you thought about certain things that were more about the fiscal and financial side of how to tell the story, but actually the ways in which those opened up real creative ideas in telling the story at the same time as well.
I mean, it was really interesting. We had a certain budget, and then all of a sudden our sales agency calls me and says, you know, times have changed, COVID, everything is different. You need to make the film for a third of the budget. And I was like, there's no way we can do a historical drama for what they were suggesting. So I called Haley and Joe, and I said, help, what do you suggest? And Joe laughed and said, well, this happened to me with Anna Karenina. You need to pick one location only. And so we went back to Aaron, who wrote the original script, and said, we need to totally rethink this and position it, recraft it, and put it in the one setting. And it had to be the Versi, which is the manor where Barbe Nicole lived in Champagne, and figure out how we can tell the story from that one location.
Which is such an echo of Barbe Nicole's experience as a winemaker. Is, you know, you have to be, if you want to achieve anything, you have to be flexible, especially these days in the film industry. You have to be flexible, you have to be willing to bend like a willow, because there are, you know, going to be limitations and restrictions, and instead of unless you're willing to give up, you have to, you know, sometimes sacrifice one thing for something else in order to continue to move forward. And I think that is definitely an aspect of Barbe Nicole's character is, you know, if I can't do it this way, then I'm going to do it that way. You know, it's just being
pure determination.
Yeah, pure determination, and a willingness to, or an unwillingness to give in or to take no for an answer. I mean, there were so many moments when.
But one other thing is, we spent a lot of time with the historian at Veuve Clicquot. And one of the things I think she told Thomas and Haley was that Barbe Nicole was curious about the world and got her information from tons of journals. And so even though she never left Champagne, or maybe she went to Paris, but I mean, she stayed totally locally, she still was able to get in as much as she possibly could historically, and what was the latest this and what was the latest that. And so that helped us decide that we could tell her story from this one location.
It's so great. And Thomas, in terms of talking about the two different timelines of the story, because we see her journey going through in the present day, but then there's also the flashbacks to her marrying Francois, his passing. And I was curious about how you said about creating this journey on screen visually and stylistically, where it almost feels like this character coming in and out of her light quite literally. She starts off in this real place of brightness and, pristine whites around her a lot when she first falls in love. And then as things become more complicated, the colors and the lighting changes a little bit. And then as she goes on this journey by herself, it kind of opens back up again.
Yes, it's jumping back to the last question a little bit as well. The constriction of shooting in one location, or the idea that the film would be more focused on the vineyard, sort of made sense in a logistical way, but actually as a restriction, as a parameter to have on the creative. Christina mentioned to me that Barb Nicole didn't leave the vineyard very much. Once in a conversation, it was sort of en passant, a comment made, and it really struck home to me that the idea that, going back to that scene with Francois, this is just after the French Revolution in 1789, 10 years later, that he sort of declares their life like a republic. They become like a republic of the marriage, and everything is contained within the marriage. And so the story that we see of their marriage, everything is on the vineyard. It's all about their life as a family with their young daughter, in the vineyard, in the house, in the courtyard, in the winery, in the barn, in the fields. So it's a very contained world, and that restriction actually then in a strange way has become the sort of strength of the film, because it's a very contained reality where we see the passage of time. And we see, as you say, a kind of a sort of almost romantic and colorful beginning to their marriage. And then we start to see that marriage change. We start to see the marriage become darker and more unusual, and then extremely unsettling and stranger as Barb Nicole remembers from the present her life. So again, sometimes restrictions can make a kind of strength, I think, and the story is this idea about memory. So it's set in the present with Barb Nicole as a widow, but she's remembering her life, and it seems to be a happy life and a happy relationship and a happy marriage, and that they seem to have a lovely young daughter, and everything seems okay. And then gradually, as the film progresses, the memories change, and life isn't quite as rosy, and their life together wasn't perfect, and her memories sort of allow her eventually to become free. So it's sort of, in a way, and this was something I shared with Christina and Haley while I was shooting, it felt a little bit like it was a ghost story, but actually it felt sort of like she was trapped. And the film feels like she's trapped in this vineyard, and there's no escape, but actually it becomes her liberation. It sort of allows her to become emancipated in a way.
And didn't you want it to be the kind of the last time that she's having a flashback in memory of her husband, Francois, that's when she really fully comes into herself in the film in the way that you were telling it?
Absolutely. There's a moment of kind of, you sort of feel this. It's I find that scene very emotional in where we have that final flashback. You sort of feel released in a way by the story. It sort of has a very kind of liberating effect, just as she sort of lays into the court at the end. So yeah.
And Haley, in talking about this character in your performance as well, I love watching the journey of a character who has a lot of strength, but it also allows for the vulnerability and fear that comes along with that. And especially because she's in a position where the world around her is doubting her and questioning her and pushing back on her so much, she doesn't have a space that she can voice this really to anyone. And so it's such an internal thing for her. And so I was very curious in how you approached playing that and finding it and making sure that you're honoring both sides of what it feels like to do something incredibly impassioned and strong.
Yeah, I always find it interesting. I'm working on a project now where, it's like, there's the tropes of playing strong characters is deepening your voice and somehow becoming more masculine. And what I loved about Clicquot is that there is and certainly in our film a femininity that we leaned into, and that in the beginning of the film, Barb Nicole is 20 years old, and you have her, this kind of naive, curious, wide-eyed, completely doting girl, and she over time and certainly through surviving the loss of her true partner, she is forced to become her own free thinking, creative, soulful force of nature. And by the end of the film, she is standing in her own power. Of course, that power looks a lot different than what a powerful woman looks like today. But I think a strong woman is only created by the adversity that she stands against and she, walks through. I'm really interested in characters that face challenges and, overcome those challenges and become the force that they are. But, that's what makes for an interesting arc. And I think that's what made for an interesting arc in this film.
It does. And Christina, you were mentioning earlier the archivist with Clicquot that was working very closely with you all on this film. And I was interested in the way in which you took a lot of the information that they were giving you and found a way to present it to the audience in a way that adds to the story and isn't just, oh, we're telling you this piece of information, seeing the scene where she's tying the little orange ribbon that's so iconic now around a bottle and coming up with the idea of branding and marketing and even just the logistics of trade restrictions with the Napoleonic War and how you said about figuring out a way to present that to the audience and incorporate it into the story through its characters.
I mean, it would have, again, if we'd had a different budget, we probably would have filmed it and chosen different details in terms of telling the story of France's first female entrepreneur, and then she actually became Europe's first female entrepreneur. So yes, I mean we kept trying. We had the information from the historian. We had done a lot of research. We had Tilar's book to lean on, but at the same time, this is a film, and we wanted to be as cinematic as possible and find the little details that resonated for the film. And yet at the same time, this is, a love story, and it's a love story between Barb Nicole and Francois, and to some extent, the Vines, and that's what resonated for us.
I love that. And Haley, in terms of your performance as well, it almost, going back to the two kind of journeys that we see your character going on. And like you were mentioning, she's so young when we first meet her, and we really do see the course of several years. I was interested in how you kind of really thought about the idea of her story as like these two arcs and how you were going to map each of them out individually and finding all the beats and the journey and the growth for her throughout.
I mean, developing a character is such a personal and intimate process, and I think that took a lot of time to discover and to pinpoint what aspects of the character that there's the woman in white, the woman in red, and the woman in black, and so those were kind of pillars of the character, and I had very specific rituals for getting into the headspace of those while Barb was in those different phases of her girlhood or her womanhood or her sensuality or her obsession, her obsession, what that obsession means. I guess for me, acting is an act of spirituality, and I think that for Barb, winemaking was an act of spirituality. It's something that empowered her. It's something that made her feel that liberated her and made her feel free. And I guess I can definitely relate with that when I'm on set, when I'm creating, when I'm collaborating with others. It's where I feel like I'm meant to be. So I think that resonated for me within playing this character.
I love that. And Thomas, obviously you were talking extensively before about filming so much of this within the walls of the vineyard, but there is a scene towards the end of the film where we see her step so far outside of that, and there's a whole court sequence, and we watch this character have to listen to all the things and the narrative that the world around her is trying to impart on her and who they think she is. But ultimately, she's the one to tell us at the end who she is in plain words. And so I was interested in how you wanted to approach a scene like that, taking her outside of the vineyard with all of those elements.
Oh, well, yes, I mean, linking back to your last question for Haley, I think in a lot of the scenes, when we were dealing with the present, we were trying to find these kind of links and doorways and bridges to the memories of things that had happened in those places in the house. And so we were always trying to find kind of ways to hook the story back to itself, kind of like a kind of knitting exercise. There was a sort of, everything was sort of linked back to a memory, and it was very sensual and acoustic and sound and music and glass and drops and bringing all these kind of different things into her experience of her life and her memories. And then right at the end of the film, she's sort of the real world kind of crashes in to this reverie. So it's sort of like it's sort of really shocking suddenly to have all these people in the story, because everything is quite contained and small. Even the big scenes are relatively small scenes, actually. And then there's this, the establishment or the champagne manufacturers and justice and spectators and all these people to see, whether or not she can hold on to the vineyard, whether she can actually fight to hold on to her business. And so one of the references, one of the things that was fundamental in the staging of that and the think of that was this idea of a woman on her own surrounded by men, like a kind of almost like a fairy tale image of a woman on her own in a space with men at different heights in different ages and looks, all staring at her. So all looking at her from behind her head. So she couldn't actually look at them. But they were all looking at her. So it's this kind of almost like absolute paranoia feeling to the setting. And when I was at school, I always remember the Dreyfus affair, which was a very famous military court in French history, where they accused this man, Alfred Dreyfus, of being a spy in the First World War. And there's an image of that court case where he's sitting on a chair surrounded by justiciars, by French judges and workers and a jury and all these military people, and he's sat on his own in the middle of the court. And I always remember this image. It's sort of terrifying. This is sort of absolute terror of sitting in that sort of environment alone, like no one to counsel you or no one to say anything to you, no one to encourage you or support you. And so that was a sort of inspiration for the court case, was to just absolutely make Barb Nicole isolated. She's totally isolated visually and spiritually, physically in that moment. And and then Haley, you know, delivers this incredible performance, which is, you know, you know, I get the hairs go up on my arm when I even think about it. It's an absolutely wonderful moment, where she delivers Barb Nicole to the jury, to the judge. You know, she defends her right to be a winemaker and her right to, as a woman, to have that right.
Oh my gosh, I felt absolute terror and dread during that scene. And I had, you know, I had this incredible speech to deliver, and I had no idea how to do it or what to do. And I thought, you know what? I'm just going to lean into that feeling and try to keep it together and you know, keep moving forward. And I think that is a perfect example of, you know, I felt really in those shoes, and I felt like this, you know, I felt like this is what it feels like. This is what it feels like to be completely isolated and to be taunted by all of these external forces. And, you know, how do you defend yourself in this situation? Like, it doesn't feel like words are enough to defend yourself, and sometimes, and you know, at that point, I thought, okay, I'm just gonna simply say the words. And I felt so empowered at that moment that, you know, Barb doesn't have anyone to hold her hand, and I didn't have anyone to hold my hand and help me deliver that speech, and had no idea how to do it. Of course, I had Thomas there and everybody, you know, rooting for me, but I was terrified, and just getting through it felt like such a relief. It was actually the last scene that we shot. It was the last scene.
Yeah, of the...
Because of course we never left the vineyard, so that was the last scene that we shot. That was the last day of production.
Well,
And
it's
I
such a great
said, that's a wrap.
The last 2 days.
And
Yeah.
I think I was falling over at that point. I think I fell over after we finished that scene.
Well, it's such a great moment, and I really, really loved everything about the film. So thank you so much for talking about it today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.